Okay, this is the Transformations 3 worksheet. Transformations 3 worksheet. Alright, so the first problem says, which equation is represented by the graph below? Okay, so right away, I should actually be able to kill two answers just by knowing my parent functions. So remember, if I look at the answers here, some of these are x squared, some of them involve the absolute value of x, and I want you to know that x squared is a parabola. It looks like this. Right, and absolute value, so this is y equals x squared, and absolute value of x is this V-shaped thing. It looks like that. Okay, so which one of these two, this is absolute value of x, which one of these two does this belong to? And if I look, I say, okay, this is curvy, right? So there's no way that this is going to turn into that. It must have started with this parent function. So right away, I know that C and D have to be the wrong answer because they involve an absolute value. And we know our answer has to involve a parabola. Okay. The next thing I want to think about, I would like to think about the effect of, let's see, should we start with answers or with the parabola? Let's think about the parabola, actually. Let me go back to my picture here. Notice my parabola is upside down, right? So for it to end up upside down, it must have been reflected, right? And in this case, I know that it was reflected across the x-axis because it ended up down here, right? So it ended up down there. It must have been reflected across my axis down here, right? And how do we do that with our math, with our equation? How do we make the equation reflected? We do y equals negative x squared, okay? We put a minus sign in front of our whole equation, and that flips across the x-axis. As a side note, if we wanted to reflect across the y-axis, like this, across the y-axis, then my equation would be a little different. It would be y equals negative x squared. And see how the minus sign's on the inside? That's a reflection across the y-axis, but we want a reflection across the x-axis, so the minus sign is on the outside. So we'll get rid of that. So we've made it to here. Great. We have one more step to go. The last step is if we look at our question, the parabola has been shifted upward. And if we count how many units, it's kind of hard to see, but it goes 1, 2, it looks like 3 units upward. Okay, so it's been shifted 3 units upward. And how do we shift the equation, or change the equation, to make our parabola move 3 units upward? So we have two options here. And I want you to remember that to make our equation go up, we need to add 3 to the end of our equation, okay? So A is our answer. I just want to remind you that by adding to the end of our equation, we're going to go up or down, depending on if this is plus or minus. And here on answer choice B, where we're adding to the inside of our equation, see how our 3 is on the inside? That's going to be a horizontal shift. So that's going to move our equation or our graph left or right, okay? So now you know this is on the outside, so it must be answer choice A, because outside means an up or down shift. Okay, that's number 1. Take a second and look at number 2 for me. Okay, so in this case, they're giving us the function, which is, I'll write it in shift a marker here. So our function is f of x equals absolute value of negative x plus 4. Okay, so there's two things that are happening. Let's deal with them separately. And they even give us the parent function here. So our parent function is f of x equals absolute value of x. So the first question I want you to ask yourself is, what is different between my parent function and my transformed function? And there's two differences that should jump out at you right away. They are the minus sign and the plus 4. And let's deal with them separately here. Let's do the minus sign first. So when you see a minus sign, the first thing you have to think is reflection, okay? If there's a minus sign, it must have been reflected in some way. The next question to ask yourself is, am I dealing with I guess I can just look at this graph here. Am I dealing with a vertical, or I should say a reflection across the x-axis, which would be coming down here? Or is it a reflection across the y-axis like this, all right? And remember, if your minus sign is on the outside, like that, if it's like that, that would make our graph reflect across the x-axis. So is that what is happening in the problem here? Not really. The minus sign is on the inside. So Because our minus sign is on the inside, that means our reflection is across the y-axis. Okay, so this is reflection across the y-axis. So right away, before I go any further, I can eliminate some bad answers, which is exactly what I want you to do in the test. So I see that answer choice A and B say reflect across the x-axis, which is wrong. So we can kill those two, and you already have a good chance of getting the right answer. So the last thing we have to figure out is whether or not this +4, if this is going to be a horizontal shift or a vertical shift. Okay. Now remember that if we add a number to the end of an equation, this is added to the end of the equation, it's going to be a vertical shift. So our answer must be D. And let me remind you that a horizontal shift, if this has been a horizontal shift, it would have looked like this. It would have been inside the absolute value. That would have been a horizontal shift. Okay, so that's number 2. All right, next let's look at number 3. So it says the graph of the equation y equals x squared plus 1 is shown. And this is kind of a typo. They didn't actually show the graph, but that's okay. It says which equation will shift the graph up 3 units. All right, so we want to shift the graph up 3 units. So we're starting with y equals x squared plus 1, and we can kind of think about the graph here. So we know our parent function is y equals x squared is our parent function. So we're starting with y equals x squared as our parent. And the, put some tick marks on here, 2, 3, 4. And the equation they give us is actually already shifted up by 1 unit because 1 was added to the end of my equation, which shifts things upward, right? So here, this is going to be our starting equation, y equals x squared plus 1. And in the problem, they want to shift the graph up 3 units. So where are we going to end up? If we go up 3 units, we're going to go 1, 2, 3, all the way up here. And this is actually at 4. So it's gone 4 units up. So what is the formula for this guy? It's y equals x squared plus what? Plus 4, because it's up 4 total units now. So the answer to this is C. All right, question 4 says, the graphs shown are of the form y equals ax squared. Okay, so what they're trying to tell you is that now we're multiplying our equation by a number. So if we multiply our equation in transformation land, we need to know that multiplying is either going to be an expansion or a compression. Our graph's either going to get wider or narrower. Okay, and the other thing you have to know, that you must know to do well on this problem and on your test, is that, for example, here's my parabola again. This is y equals x squared. Okay, parabola. If I put a really, really big value in front of x, like, I don't know, y equals 10x squared, it's going to make my parabola a lot more narrow. And the bigger this number, the more narrow my parabola gets. And also, the opposite is true. So for example, if I put a very small number, like y equals 0.1x, that's a pretty small number, it's less than 1, I get a wide parabola, right? And the smaller this number is, the wider my parabola. So it's kind of backwards. So big number, skinny parabola, small number, wide parabola. Okay? So this is asking for the largest value of A, the largest multiplier. So remember, our largest multiplier, like 10, should be the skinniest, the narrowest graph. So which graph is narrowest? I think it's C. All right. Last question. It says, as part of a project, Ms. Chavez asked her class to graph y equals negative x squared plus 8. How is the parent graph transformed? So our first question must be, what is the parent graph? So look at your equation carefully, and you'll see the parent graph must be y equals x squared. Okay, and our equation is y equals negative x squared plus 8. Okay, so there's 2 things that are different. Thing 1 is the minus sign. And when you see a minus sign, you must think reflection. You must think reflection, okay? So our next question, is it reflected across the y-axis or the x-axis? And remember that if it's on the inside, it's going to be reflected across the y-axis, So right away, I can eliminate answer A and answer C because those say x-axis. Last but not least, What does our plus 8 do? Remember, this is on the outside of our equation. It's not on the inside, it's on the outside. So it must move our graph up or down, and it's a plus sign, so it must go up 8 units. So the answer must be D. There you go.